She swore never to love again and lived alone. Then a rancher asked 4 words that broke every wall down. Subscribe to Wild Sky Stories' new emotional tales every day. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the vast Montana sky as Eliza Thornton hung her freshly washed linens on the clothesline behind her small cabin. Her fingers, roughened by years of hard work, moved with practiced efficiency. At 32 years old, she had accepted that her life would unfold in quiet solitude, miles from the bustling town of Sagebrush Valley, with only her small vegetable garden and a stubborn milk cow named Marigold for company. 3 years had passed since she arrived in this untamed territory, carrying nothing but a worn carpet bag and the weight of a broken heart. Back in Philadelphia, she had been engaged to a man who promised her the world, but delivered only betrayal. When she discovered him in the arms of her own sister 2 weeks before their wedding, something inside her shattered beyond repair. She sold everything she owned, bought passage on a train heading west, and never looked once over her shoulder. The isolation suited her. Out here, among the endless prairie grass and the whispering pines, nobody asked questions. Nobody pitied her with their eyes or whispered behind gloved hands about poor Eliza who couldn't keep her man. Out here, she was simply the woman who lived alone on the old Henderson property, who came to town once a month for supplies and spoke to nobody beyond what was necessary. She had learned to mend her own roof when storms tore through. She had taught herself to split wood until calluses covered her palms like leather gloves. She had survived winters so brutal that ice formed on the inside of her windows and she slept beside the iron stove just to keep from freezing. Every challenge the land threw at her she met with gritted teeth and stubborn determination. But on nights when the coyotes sang their mournful songs to the silver moon, loneliness crept in through the cracks in her cabin walls and settled deep in her chest like a winter cold that would not fade. It was on such a morning, while Eliza was patching a hole in her fence that kept letting jackrabbits into her garden, that she first saw him riding across the open prairie toward her property. His horse was a magnificent chestnut mare, and he sat in the saddle with the easy confidence of a man born to the land. As he drew closer, she noticed the breadth of his shoulders beneath his sun-faded blue shirt, and the way his dark hair curled slightly beneath his wide-brimmed hat. She straightened, hammer still clutched in her hand, watching him approach with the wariness of a deer sensing a predator. "Ma'am," he called out, touching the brim of his hat, as he brought his horse to a stop a respectful distance from her fence. "Name's Samuel Crawford. I own the Double C Ranch about 6 miles north of here. I don't mean to intrude, but I noticed you got some cattle mixed in with your property. 3 of my heifers broke through a weak spot in my boundary fence last night." Eliza studied him with narrowed eyes. His face was weathered by sun and wind, with deep lines around eyes the color of strong coffee. She guessed him to be somewhere near 40, though the hard life of ranching made such estimations difficult. There was something gentle in those eyes, something that made her guard waver despite herself. "I saw them this morning," she said, her voice rusty from disuse. "They're down by the creek. Didn't know whose they were. I apologize for the trouble, ma'am. I'll get them rounded up and out of your hair." She watched as he rode toward the creek, disappearing behind a stand of cottonwood trees. 20 minutes later he returned, driving 3 reluctant heifers before him. He tipped his hat once more as he passed by her fence. "Much obliged for your patience, ma'am. If there's ever anything I can do to repay the kindness, you just say the word." She said nothing, only nodded curtly and returned to her fence mending. But long after the sound of his horse's hooves faded into the distance, she found herself thinking about the warmth in his voice and the way he had called her ma'am with such sincere respect. 2 weeks later, Samuel Crawford appeared again at her property line. This time he carried a bundle wrapped in brown paper. "My sister lives with me," he explained, dismounting and approaching the fence where Eliza stood frozen like a startled rabbit. "She makes the best apple butter in 3 counties. Wanted me to bring you some as thanks for letting me retrieve those heifers without any fuss." Eliza stared at the package in his outstretched hand. "That's not necessary." "Maybe not," he agreed, a small smile playing at the corners of his mouth. But she insisted. "And truth be told, my sister is not a woman who takes no for an answer." Something in his tone, the gentle self-deprecating humor, made Eliza's lips twitch despite herself. She accepted the package with a mumbled word of thanks. Samuel lingered, his eyes drifting over her small cabin, the carefully tended garden, the freshly patched fence. "You've done good work here," he said quietly. "The Henderson place was falling to pieces when they abandoned it. You brought it back to life." "It keeps me busy," she replied, uncomfortable with the praise. He nodded slowly, as if understanding far more than her words conveyed. "Well, I won't keep you from your work. But if you ever need help with anything, repairs or supplies or just a conversation, the Double C is always open to neighbors." She watched him ride away again, and that night, as she spread his sister's apple butter on fresh bread, she felt something stir in her chest that she had long believed dead. The visits became regular. Samuel always had a reason, returning a stray chicken that had wandered onto his property, offering her first pick of a litter of barn cat kittens, asking if she might know a rem. Eddie for colic in horses. Eliza was not foolish enough to believe in coincidence, but neither did she possess the will to send him away. She learned that his wife had died 7 years ago in childbirth, taking their baby daughter with her. She learned that he had nearly drunk himself to death in the grief that followed, until his sister Margaret arrived from Kansas City and quite literally saved his life by pouring his whiskey into the pig trough and threatening to do the same with him. She learned that he rose every morning at 4, worked until his body ached, and fell into dreamless sleep each night, because he feared what memories might visit if he lingered too long in the space between waking and rest. In turn, she found herself telling him things she had told no one, about her father's death when she was 16, and how she had spent years caring for her ailing mother, about the fiancé who had made her believe she was worthy of love, and then proven her a fool, about the shame that still burned in her stomach when she thought of how everyone in Philadelphia must have laughed at her naivety. Samuel listened without judgment, his coffee-dark eyes soft with understanding. "Seems to me," he said one autumn afternoon as they sat on her porch watching the sun sink toward the mountains, "that the shame belongs to him, not you. A man who betrays a woman's trust is no man at all." "I should have seen it coming," she whispered. "Everyone always said I was too plain, too quiet, practical. I should have known someone like him would never truly want someone like me." Samuel turned to look at her, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch in her throat. "Whoever told you such things was blind. You're the most remarkable woman I've ever known, Eliza. You built a life out here with nothing but your own 2 hands. You face every hardship with more courage than most men I know, and when you smile, rare as it is, you light up brighter than the summer sun." She felt heat flood her cheeks and turned away, unable to bear the sincerity in his words. Winter came hard that year. The first blizzard struck in late November, burying the landscape beneath 4 feet of snow and trapping Eliza in her cabin for nearly 2 weeks. When the storm finally broke, she struggled through the drifts to check on Marigold in the small barn, only to find the old cow lying still in her stall, frozen in the night despite the blankets Eliza had piled over her. She collapsed beside the animal who had been her only constant companion for 3 years and wept until no more tears would come. That was how Samuel found her, alerted by some instinct he could not name that had driven him through the deep snow to check on her. Without a word, he lifted her in his arms and carried her back to the cabin. He built up the fire until heat radiated through the small space, wrapped her in quilts, and pressed a cup of hot coffee into her trembling hands. "I'm being foolish," she began, aged through chattering teeth. "She was just a cow." "She was your friend," Samuel said simply, and there's nothing foolish about grieving a friend. He stayed that night, sleeping in a chair by the fire while Eliza lay in her narrow bed and listened to the wind howl outside. His presence filled the cabin with something she had not felt in years, a sense of safety, of not being utterly alone in a vast and indifferent world. In the morning, he helped her bury marigold in the frozen ground behind the barn. The work took hours, the earth resistant beneath their shovels, but neither of them spoke of giving up. When the last shovel of dirt was patted into place, Samuel removed his hat and stood in respectful silence while Eliza said her silent goodbye. Spring came slowly, the snow retreating inch by inch to reveal mud and new green growth. Samuel's visits had become daily now, always with some excuse, a tool he thought she could use, a report on how his cattle were faring, a question about whether she had seen any sign of the wolf pack that had been spotted in the region. Margaret came with him once, a formidable woman with steel-gray hair and sharp blue eyes that seemed to see everything. She inspected Eliza's cabin, her garden plans for the coming season, and the neat rows of preserved vegetables in the root cellar. "You'll do," Margaret declared finally, and something in her tone suggested this was high praise indeed. On a warm evening in May, with wildflowers blooming across the prairie and the air sweet with the promise of summer, Samuel asked Eliza to walk with him to the top of the small hill that overlooked her property. From there, they could see for miles in every direction, the endless sky stretching above them like an inverted ocean of pink and gold. "I've been coming here nearly every day for 8 months now," Samuel said, his voice rough with emotion. "And every day I tell myself I'll say what's in my heart, and every day I lose my courage." Eliza felt her heart begin to pound against her ribs. "Samuel, let me finish," he said, turning to face her. "Please, I may never find the words again." She fell silent, watching him struggle with whatever he needed to say. "When my wife died, I thought that was the end of everything good in my life. I thought I would carry that grief until it buried me too, and for a long time I was content with that. I didn't want to feel anything again because feeling meant the possibility of more pain." He reached out and took her hands in his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "Then I met you, and slowly, without meaning to, you woke up parts of me I thought were dead forever. I find myself smiling when I think of you. I find myself planning the future, something I haven't done in 7 years. I find myself hoping again, Eliza. You gave me that." Tears were streaming down her cheeks now, but she made no move to wipe them away. "I know you came out here to escape something. Now you built walls around your heart to keep from being hurt again. I understand that, and I respect it. But I'm asking you now, with everything I am, to take a chance. On me, on us, on a life together." He released one of her hands and reached into his pocket, withdrawing a simple gold ring that caught the fading light. "Eliza Thornton, will you be my wife?" The world seemed to stop. The wind stilled, the birds fell silent, and all that existed was this man standing before her, his heart laid bare in his eyes. She thought of all the reasons to say no, the fear that still lived in the darkest corners of her soul, the memory of betrayal that had shaped her for so long, the risk of opening herself to pain again after fighting so hard to become invulnerable. Then she thought of lonely nights, when the silence felt like a physical weight pressing down on her chest. She thought of the way her heart lifted whenever she heard his horse approaching. She thought of his steady presence during the darkest hours after Marigold's death. She thought of laughter returning to her life, of conversation, of connection. She thought of love. "Yes," she whispered. Samuel's face transformed, joy breaking across his weathered features like sunrise breaking over the mountains. He slipped the ring onto her finger with trembling hands, then gathered her into his arms and held her as if she were the most precious thing in the world. "I promise you," he murmured against her hair, "I will spend every day of the rest of my life proving worthy of this gift. I will never give you reason to regret trusting me. I will love you, Eliza, with everything I have, until my very last breath." She pressed her face against his chest. listening to the steady rhythm of his heart, and felt the last of her walls crumble into dust. They were married 3 weeks later in the small church in Sagebrush Valley. Margaret stood as witness, her sharp eyes suspiciously bright throughout the ceremony. The townspeople who had known Eliza only as the mysterious woman who lived alone watched in wonder as she smiled at her new husband with a radiance that transformed her entire being. That night, in the ranch house that would become her new home, Eliza stood at the window looking out at the stars scattered across the velvet sky. Samuel came to stand behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. "What are you thinking?" he asked softly. "I'm thinking that I came west to escape everything," she replied. "I thought I would find peace in solitude. Instead, I found something I never expected." "And what's that?" She turned in his arms, reaching up to cup his face in her hands. "I found home, not a place, but a person. You are my home, Samuel Crawford, and I never want to be anywhere else." He kissed her then, tender and deep, a promise sealed with love. Outside, the Montana wind sang its ancient song across the prairie, carrying with it the whispered bless, sings of the land itself. Two souls broken by the past had found in each other the strength to heal, and in that healing, they had discovered a love worth every risk, every fear, every moment of courage it took to say yes. She had lived alone. Now she would never be alone again.